city keeps its secrets, but nothing hides forever. This is the evidence trail. I've seen enough crime scenes to know one thing: people lie, but evidence can lead to the truth. And my partner, Chris G., knows how to read it. Each episode, we open the file, trace the facts, and let the science speak. So watch your step. Once you're on the evidence trail, the truth is coming for you.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Evidence Trail. I'm joined by Mark Spencer today, a forensic botanist. Hello, Mark.
Hi there, how you doing, Chris?
Not too bad. It's great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, no pleasure. My pleasure. So let's start by letting the listeners know just who you are and what you do.
So I'm a botanist. First and foremost, I've been studying and enjoying plants for pretty much the whole of my life. I actually have a background in horticulture, Kew Gardens, and then the Natural History Museum as a botanist. And I've been working in forensics for 15 years. And now is pretty much the whole of my working life. I still do a little bit of traditional botany on the side, but most of my work these days is principally in serious crime. So I do quite a lot of work involving murder inquiries, for example.
Yeah. Well, we're going to definitely cover that, as you can imagine. That's the kind of theme of this show. What is the traditional kind of botany that you would do for, say, like the Natural History Museum?
For me, well, I mean, it's fair to say botany, is the science of plants. So it's a quite big subject.
Yeah.
With 400,000 or so kind of big plants, so to speak, on the planet. So it's a massive topic that covers agriculture, pharmacy, medicine, industry, trade, as well as, the more botanical things of, plant diversity, evolution, ecology, and all that, and even horticulture. So pretty much all things planty. That I'm mainly what you call a taxonomist, or that were my origins, somebody who's interested in the diversity of plants and their evolution and naming them, amongst other things, which is called nomenclature. My role at the Natural History Museum when I was there for 12 years was looking after the British and Irish plant collection, which is essentially a collection of about 620,000 squashed, dried plants in cupboards, which some of the collection goes back several hundred years. And not only is it an important repository for science information, but actually I fairly often use them in my casework as really valuable reference tools.
I see. So if you get something that you find like out at a scene or something like that, then you've got a reference sample that you can go to for that comparison and identification.
Well, yeah. I mean, basically, as you know, we've already met. I'm quite a cocky individual, but that's the last thing you want to be doing in front of a ferocious barrister is kind of going, "Yeah, I'm Dr. Spencer, and I'm really clever, and I've identified this plant, and I know what it is." You really need to be able to do that, and then validate it by going. And I checked my cockiness by going and looking up at reference material and ensuring that actually my observations are accurate. So they're really good backup, frankly, but also, they are just really valuable primary tools for understanding things which may not quite fit. So, they're really, really handy for me.
I think as well, like from talking to you previously, for the listeners, me and Mark we've had a trip into the woods before where we will walk around the woods and then all of a sudden Mark will present me with a mushroom and just say to me, "Do you think this is going to kill you, or is this going to, or not?" And I've got to smell it. And is it right if it smells like chocolate, then it's no good?
But chocolatey things are quite bad in the fungus world generally. Anything that smells radishy, cabbagey, chocolatey, tobacco-y, ammonia-y, chlorine-y are all bad smells.
Yeah.
Having said that, the most notorious of all the fungi, the death cap, which has been in the news in a forensics environment fairly recently because of the murder inquiry and then conviction ultimately in Australia, that smells and tastes perfectly innocuous. So smells kind of handy, but you have to be a bit careful.
Yeah, it doesn't apply to every single fungi out there.
Yeah.
But I think one of the things that just amazed me when we were talking is this kind of library in your head, this kind of reference sample in your head of all the different species you can sort of identify just from wandering around. Do you have a kind of rough idea of how many are in your head?
I've tried every now and then over the years and try and think it through. And I think most people and most scientists who work in diversity, whether it's insects or plants or fungi or whatever group of organisms, I think we've all got a carrying capacity for what we remember at any one time. So 30 years ago, I was really good at tropical ferns. I can hardly remember any of them these days. So I've probably got rattling around in my head 40,000 species, the names I'm immediately familiar with. And to varying degrees, I've got a degree of competence of knowing what they are. But I probably know several thousand species pretty well.
Yeah, which is just incredible. When I compare that to, say, how many Facebook friends I've got to remember, and I might pass
on the converse, I am absolutely terrible with people, and I have always been. I've got this so much that it's almost a bit of an anxiety that literally I'll see a face, particularly if it's out of context, and I'm like, I can't remember your name. It's gone. Actually, an old friend of mine just quiet in front of me in the cinema the other day. I hadn't seen them for a few months, and literally my brain just shut down. I could not pull the word for their name.
Yeah.
Really embarrassing.
Yeah, at least plants don't put that pressure on you, do they?
No, they're a fairly pressure-free environment.
Oh, fantastic. So, in a nutshell, what is forensic botany, and how can it benefit the investigation for the criminal justice system?
Right. It's always difficult saying in a nutshell when it comes to plants and biology. So basically, it's using the scientific knowledge of plants, i.e., botany, using the scientific discipline in all its forms in the forensic environment. So what I mainly do are missing person body searches, so looking for missing persons. So using my understanding of vegetation and landscape form and history, very often with archaeologists, to help look for missing people and clandestine burials. When burials or missing people are found, I will often be called in to use the vegetation to help provide an understanding of what happened, how long they've been there, particularly if there's an unknown person and they've just got a person lying on the ground, which actually I was just at a job a couple of days ago where exactly this. The police need a time frame. So vegetation is quite handy for time frame information, and also understanding suspect activity. Damage to the vegetation is very useful for suspect activity. And then the last bit, which probably comes close to what most people would expect, is trace evidence using botanical materials, whether it's fragments, it could ultimately be pollen, fungal spores, bits of leaf, bits of wood that could be stuck to suspect clothing, footwear, car wheel arches, all sorts of places, is a very handy way of localizing where they've been.
Yeah. And are there sort of like you say, when you're localizing an area, is there particular areas in the country where you would say expect to find certain plant life, and where, it's less common, so you can create that kind of map?
Absolutely. Fundamentally, this is one of the things that human beings are very good at kind of not noticing plants. They just is, for most humans, a green blob backdrop in our existence. But plants have their own lives to live, and because of that, they live in different parts of the country or different parts of the planet because the conditions suit them. So they have what we call a biogeography where they live. So many plants will have a very discrete distribution associated with, for example, their preference for chalky soils or wet conditions or dryness and many other environmental conditions and soil types, and also maybe associations with other organisms. So plants have got a distribution, which is how they come to be useful in forensics. But what we're really lucky in this country is actually we've got very, very sophisticated and detailed mapping of the distribution of our wild plants. I'm actually part of a national network organisation called the Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland, and we sit on a data repository of many millions of plant records all over Great Britain and Ireland, going back nearly 400 or so years. So we have very, very detailed, sophisticated mapping of many of the kind of wild plant species in our landscape. That is really valuable for forensic casework.
Yeah, I mean, back 400 years ago, they probably didn't think that it was going to be used for forensic casework
No,
when that was started. But
no, definitely not. My ancient, well, relatively ancient precursor in the world of botany, I'm responsible for the plant records in the Greater London area, is a man called Samuel Johnson, who was very influential in the 17th century. And in 1629, he did a perambulation through Hampstead Heath and made plant records of Hampstead Heath.
wow.
And he's probably one of the first set of data that I've got in my botanical records for Greater London. And I doubt he ever thought they'd be used for fighting crime.
No, but his legacy lives on.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And you mentioned about, say, a predicament that the police might have is, say, yeah, they find a missing person, but they don't know how long that missing person's been there. And you mentioned about suspect activity and aging that. So what are you looking for in the plant life to, say, age how long, say, the damage has been there or that person may have been there?
It's going to be it's often quite tricky, and it's really variable because you can imagine our landscapes are very different, woodlands, fields, waterways. All of those landscapes have different types of plants in them, and therefore it means the conundrum and the scenario is different each time. So what I'm usually looking for are, in the case of somebody who might be lying deceased on the ground, is how the vegetation that's immediately around them, how are they responding to the presence of them? How are the plants growing around them? Because if the plants are growing over and around them, that provides me with an understanding of time frame. I can look at the branching patterns and the regrowth and provide an estimate for how many months or years, depending on the type of plant. So it's very much dependent upon what the landscape is and what's available in the vegetation. I actually just been doing a piece of work involving seedlings, because different types of tree and plant, their seeds germinate at different rates through the year, and their seedlings grow at different rates. So if you have seedlings emerging from a burial, for example, that is a form of time framing that can be useful. So the plant material can provide the time frame data, and I very often use brambles, for example, and also stinging nettles, and occasionally holly and ivy, because they're very often found at crime scenes, and they've got a pretty useful sort of what we call sort of anatomy and architecture for understanding how rapidly they've grown after somebody's been there. But the other thing is really around understanding people's behavior as well. And this is something people find quite surprising, in that as somebody moves into a landscape and they do something either criminal or innocent, they have an impact on the vegetation. And that is a micro tell of their intentions and their movements and how and when they've done things. And I mean, quite often you'll be like, yes, and just walk through it, you can see trampled foliage. And that's reasonably useful, but sometimes you will get quite a detailed understanding of something. I've had several cases actually not suspicious, for example, where people have just chosen to take their lives, that you can actually see in the vegetation frankly the distress they were in, moving in erratic zigzagged patterning, for example, creating spaces for themselves in which they're going to die. So there are all sorts of curious ways in which the vegetation can give you a new avenue and a new story. And it's fair to say, in 15 years of doing this and recovering or being part of recovering of many, many dead people over the years, pretty much every time it's slightly different.
Yeah, it always is. Just like you alluded to the different seedlings. It's not one seedling fits all. It's, you've got to have that kind of appreciation of the different species and how they regrow. And like you say, not everyone is the same and acts the same.
No, and I mean, with biology, one of the things with forensic ecology and botany, and pretty sage about fire science as well, is that they are very unpredictable models in terms of human understanding in many ways. We might understand the broad stroke of how the natural world responds. But the natural world is quite different to human-oriented forensics. If we do fingerprint or gunshot residue or handwriting, with the set of variables are fairly constrained by the materiality of that discipline.
Mhm.
Whereas with botany, for example, I'm not only having to consider the soil, the plants, the landscape history, the agriculture, the forestry, as well as all these and weather conditions, environmental conditions, and that makes for a rather more complex. I'm not saying that makes me uniquely clever or anything. It just is a messier realm to unpick and understand what's going on. And I've worked with a couple of your colleagues over the last couple of years, and literally we've been working in complex cases where the material world of botany and the world of fire has come together,
Mm.
and both of those disciplines impacting upon each other in terms of what's going on is really interesting
Yeah.
for me as a scientist. I think we've spent too much time in the world of forensics overall. I think in bunkers,
Yeah.
and that's a bit of an old-fashioned terminology, but it's not very trendy to say bunkers and silos these days, is it? There's probably some other terminology, but we've tended to isolate certain disciplines. Obviously at the moment, in terms of government priorities, home office priorities, and policing priorities, is all about big data and the core pillars of national security and other things like that. And in that drive to get our self around the massive hurdle of digital cyber crime, security, and things like that, we've entrenched our belief into that area, into big data, that's the only big data that exists.
Mm.
But actually, the biological world and the world of soil is big data as well. Plant materiality and the natural world is a huge resource for understanding crime, both within UK borders and internationally. So, gone down a bit of a rabbit hole there of one of my pets there, which is how we view certain types of science in a bit of a hierarchy.
Yeah, definitely. And there is like a huge focus on digital crime at the moment, isn't
Yeah.
there? And
Okay.
yeah, and every single investigation, it's like, have you seized their phone? Have you seized their computer? Things like that, which, yeah, I get, but we need to not forget about I say the basics.
As we know,
but
as we know from those who have been involved in that, very often those, with all the expertise we have, those data are not infallible.
Mm.
And we risk a lot if we put ourselves purely in the realm of the digital environment, because they are only proxies for the real world, to put it in a kind of crude terminology. They're not the physical direct here and now.
Mm.
And if we forget or overlook physical forensics,
Mm.
and that can be traditional things which are getting overlooked now, such things as, footwear.
Mm.
Fewer and fewer people in this country do footwear work, for example. My own discipline, soil science, and all the other practical based materiality of forensics, if we just put ourselves into the digital world, I think we put ourselves at quite a great risk.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you're kind of classic criminal. I say classic criminal. Most criminals out there would have an awareness of digital crime, so they'd know that, they can do things to hide that evidence, to help destroy that evidence. Whereas I don't think it's at the forefront of their memory, at their mind rather, to think about forensic botany. And
I think forensic ecology and botany is I think it's less frequent that somebody will be aware of it. It does happen. I have had a few cases where the person was quite aware. And that's always the nature, isn't it, of forensic sciences and investigatory work is, it's always an arms race in terms of knowledge and power and who manages to get what. So I think, it's something that's always there, but it shouldn't preclude us from kind of looking at different ways of doing things.
Yeah. My next question to you, and I like asking this question to my guests, is Was there, say, a particular event or a particular moment in time, looking back at young Mark, so, we're talking a couple years ago.
Yeah, right.
That was too smooth,
Yeah.
wasn't it? Was there something that you might like this as well, planted the seed with forensic botany for you?
Oh gosh.
Sorry.
Well, actually, no. Not as young me. I never really had any kind of interest in crime scene dramas, thrillers, murder mysteries, or anything like that, really, when I was younger. And I never even had considered a career that was even close to forensics and the world of policing. It never occurred to me. So it was a bolt out of the blue.
Oh, I see.
Over 15 years ago. So I estimate now I've been doing it regularly for 15 years. It's getting a bit blurry at the edges now. But I was just working at the Natural History Museum in my job as a museum curator, looking after the 620,000 plant specimens. And the phone goes, Dr. Spencer, can you help us? We've got a dead body in a ditch. We're pretty certain we know who they are, but the circumstances might be suspicious. We need to know how long they've been there. Can you help us? So I went from to straight in at the deep end and going, oh, that's cool. Yes. Wow. Amazing. So yeah, I didn't have that kind of build up of, structuring my career. There's no career pathway as such for forensic botany. It's not really present even in, relatively diverse forensic science courses at university. You'll be lucky if you get an hour or two in 3 years of forensic botany. And so I just went from being a normal botanist, to being involved in forensics. So and it's fair to say, I wouldn't have been still would be doing it without the help and support of some amazing people who are already professionals in the sector.
Mm.
Particularly one person who I won't name because she'll be like, Mark, but she was a very, very powerful and influential and supportive person for me in terms of holding my hand gently and teaching me the ropes. I still find it quite bizarre, the idea that it's getting harder, but the idea that a random person can declare themselves an expert and swan into a crime scene and profess.
Yeah.
It's quite extraordinary that is still essentially possible. It's getting harder, but it is still essentially possible.
Yeah.
And I literally, the first few scenes, first year or so, I didn't even know what a pulsar was. I was like, what? Literally, I had no idea.
Yeah, they're a great asset, aren't they?
Yeah.
You want to...
All of those things. And, the nightmare of, going, oh, you're a CSI, but you're a SOCO, and all of this kind of, the diversity of language in British police forces and the diversity of ways of doing things, which still I find a little bit horrifying at times. That there's quite a lot of plurality in policing about how they approach certain things, which I do my best to bite my tongue about while at sea, but I go home and go, oh my God, they do that though. Yes.
Yeah, you and me both.
Yeah, one of my pet hates are people that don't establish secure and sensible entry paths into scenes. People who use pre-existing footpaths. I'm like, yep. Of course, the suspect and the deceased will have been along that path, and everybody else in the district. So maybe we could just use somewhere else to get to the scene.
Yeah. And we always
and
talk
that still happens.
We always talk about common approach paths. I mean, it's one of the first things that CSIs are taught and everything like that. But I just think it just gets forgotten. And in your line of work, it is so important.
It can be catastrophic. Sometimes.
Yeah.
If you're being asked to provide an understanding of time frame, and by the time I've got there, they've had, the whole search team go down that path, and they're big burly folks normally. They've demolished everything. I'm like, well, all that time series is gone because that footpath was, half a metre wide. And you've now had 15 search team down there and it's 3 meters wide and everything's gone. So it can have, really, really quite serious consequences. And
Mm.
it's kind of, I jokingly I do a thing called the flamingo walk sometimes with search teams, which I quite enjoy doing, partly because it's a way of me being evil to them and me having a laugh. But it's behind it, but it's a very serious thing because people in policing are very expert and experienced in the realms they're comfortable with. And that's usually the built environment and the dead people.
Mm.
They're generally not very good in complex vegetated landscapes, and they see the plant material as a hindrance.
Mm.
And so they just thunder through it. And in that moment, you lose huge amounts of evidence around timeframes, trace, etc., because just knocking a branch means I could have lost a load of trace evidence, because if it was in one position and it's been moved 2 foot away, then there's no contact and therefore the trace has gone. And so the flamingo walk is where I basically make them kind of lift their feet up like flamingos, point their toes down and look where their toes are going and follow their nose down and watch where their toes go into the ground.
Mm.
So I quite like to bully people into doing the flamingo walk for a few minutes, because it just makes the point that it's really important to actually look at these other things, and think about the complexity and diversity of non-human dominated crime scenes.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I've seen search teams before take strimmers to, areas and things like that, just so they can search down low. And I think often with your expertise, it can be like an afterthought. It can be, someone could just mention it and think, oh, actually, that's a really good idea. And then when you get there, it's all been lost.
And certainly things like strimmers are really valuable at the right time. Generally speaking, what I try to achieve, and, I sound like a moaning mini, but I fully understand often this is about resourcing and draining and things like this. But ideally, if I can be there for 10 minutes at the beginning, I can literally walk around that space and go, right, okay, I've checked it for trace, it's been photographed, it's documented, I've got the thing. Now, you want to look for knives? Strim away.
Yeah.
And it's done. So there's a proportionality and timing in all of the things. But also, quite often, for search in particular, is not aware that the plant material is not just a barrier for them in terms of finding the knives, but it's a very effective agent to help them work out what bits to prioritize. So I quite often, when I work and talk with search teams, I'm working on complex cases, but actually, if your time frame is 6 months, there's virtually no point, if you're looking for clandestine burial, in looking in a wood where the ground is dominated by ivy, particularly if it's thick ivy, because ivy is virtually impossible to dig through, put a person in without trashing it, and it not taking a couple of years or more to heal over, because it's quite slow under those circumstances. So there's sometimes a bit of proportionality about what the weirdologist can provide. A bit of information front end can actually potentially save a lot of money.
And is it something that, say, like a police force could take a picture of and send it to you just for that kind of, what do you reckon?
Pictures are really tricky. Photographs, partly because, people are often not thinking about the vegetation from a botany or oriented point of view. And I've had, sometimes I get really, really abstract landscapes where, it's like, well, there's a lovely picture of the Yorkshire Dales or like the back end of a leaf, and rarely the bits in between. A conversation, one of the things, look, quite often you can actually tease out with crime scene manager or a search lead what the challenge is and what the advice will be, usually with a conversation, and then agree whether it's necessary to deploy somebody like me or not. So, I'm always like, yeah, for those of you out there, crime scene managers and search leads and SIOs, give me a bell. Very happy to talk through what those problems are, and go, and so if I'm not needed, I'll say I'm not needed. I'm not going to fleece you. But I think it is so important to try and think about what is in front of you in a slightly different way, because most people in police forces are so used to the built environment that the landscape freezes them. They freeze with fear. And I've had very frequently, I've incredibly experienced people with 20, 30 years of scene management under their belts in the built environment. They're confronted with vegetation and streams and ditches and insects, and they go like a rabbit in a car headlights, because they're just not used to how the rules they know from the crime scene handbook and their training or college of policing, etc., or peer kind of info often fall away.
When the flames are gone, the search for answers begins. Prometheus Forensic Services are independent specialists in fire and gas explosion investigation, delivering clear, court-ready evidence across the UK and internationally. They hold ISO 9000 and 1 accreditation for fire investigation. Prometheus also delivers specialist training courses. Find out more at www.prometheus-fs.co.uk. Prometheus Forensic Services, revealing the truth behind the fire.
One thing I've had in my head since you said it, and I'd really like to talk to you about it, is that first phone call that you got from that kind of, I'm Mark working in the Natural History Museum, and now I'm, Mark, a forensic botanist, all of a sudden. What prompted them to pick up the phone to you at that point? Because you weren't a forensic botanist at that time in your life, were you?
No, I was second or third choice.
Oh.
So I suspect you some of your listeners might know of a woman called Patricia Wiltshire, who's preeminent in the field globally. So up until, probably me being around professionally in the UK, she was probably the go-to person to go for many forces of people to go to. I don't know what particular reason on this particular day the force contacted the Natural History Museum, but the call initially went through to my colleague, and my colleague is a delicate-minded but a supremely good botanist, and he basically went, "No way, I'm not doing that." Yeah. Speak to Spencer, he's weird, he'll do it, kind of thing, probably. And so literally it kind of got rebounded from him to me, and I just went, "Oh, I'll give it a go." And as you know, you don't know whether you can handle it until the first time you've been there. And then you go, "Yes, I can," or "No, I can't."
Yeah. And then you're in the thick of it all of a sudden, and you don't know how you got there.
Yeah.
Oh,
but certainly I don't regret it. I love it.
Yeah, I can really tell, like from working with you and things like that, it's almost like the woods speak to you in a way that it doesn't to anyone else when we were down there.
Yeah. I think, there's a story comes back to me when I look at a landscape. There's a narrative about its age, what people have been doing with it and stuff like that. And then placing the deceased in that space and kind of understanding it, it's not a unique skill, and it pairs up. I had a really, actually, with that job with military search, doing kind of military search. I've got to be careful now, not say too much, where my discipline around forensic botany and military search perspectives on looking at the landscape, we were coming into the space from different perspectives, but it was really mutually quite strongly informative. We were both kind of going, we were like two little boys, frankly, kind of in the woods going, "Oh, look, you can see this and I can see that." And really enjoying and respecting each other's knowledge. Again, comes back to what I just said. We really shouldn't be doing forensics in isolation. Like when I worked with you and your team and your colleague, and explained it to one of your colleagues that the charred look on a piece of wood wasn't in fact burning, but it was a fungus.
Yeah.
It was quite a nice one. And your colleague's a very experienced person. And they were like, "What? Oh my God."
Yeah.
Yes.
And they've never heard that in 25 years, had they, of doing their work?
And I think, and I think that fungus has probably tricked a fair few people who've got some degree of fire knowledge through crime scene management, and they've ended up in a wood and seen wood and thought, "Oh, that's burnt," when it's not.
Yeah. But I think this is this is what impressed me about working with you, and it's a great message to all experts out there. It's like you say, don't work in isolation, because I think it's really important to know where your boundary is, and then you can pass it on to someone else, such as like you work closely with entomologists who, would study bugs and things, whereas you're more with the plant life, but the two just go hand in hand. So we have both of you at a scene. You've got double the strength there.
Yeah.
And that's the way it should be. It shouldn't be I'm the expert, I know everything. You don't need to rely on anyone else but me. Yeah, it's a really important message to have out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like you said, working with someone from the military as well. Yeah, it was really cool for me to work with you both.
That was a nice little job, that was. It had it all in a nice little package.
Yeah.
All the disciplines.
So for my listeners that obviously don't know as much about plants as you, are there any sort of interesting facts that you might have about common species that people might just walk past either down the road or through the woods that, if they're out on
Do you want to extend this podcast by about 5,000 hours? I'll give your viewers a important and depressing factoid, which is that all the vegetation around us as we walk our streets, in this case Britain, the vegetation around us is changing phenomenally fast.
Quicker
because
than
of climate
it ever has
change.
done. Yeah.
But really, really fast at the moment. So this is a really important thing. The natural world around us is not only informing us about the forensic environment, but it is actually, frankly, screaming out, going, things are very, very wrong. As a biologist, every time I step outside of my front door onto the streets where I live in London, in southern England, I am seeing the direct evidence of man-made climate change, shifts in plant behavior, shifts in plant distribution, and things like that. So, yes, lots of facts. There's a particularly gloomy one. I'll give you a fun fungusy fact. I'm trying to think of some jolly ones to make you all happier now. So, fungi are not related to plants. Our closest relatives are fungi and us. We're more closely related to fungi than plants, and vice versa. So now you've got me on the hop. I can't think of happy things. I jokingly refer to the fact that I actually specialise in the botany of doom, because much of my work as an adult in plants has been latterly in forensics. But before that, the Natural History Museum was around invasive species. A lot of work I do is around that, and also climate change. So I'm not really a very happy botanist, it's fair to say.
I don't think most people are in forensic science. Like, people say to me, like, "Oh, Chris, how's your week been?" And then I just tell them what I've been, at what scene I've been at. It's like, oh, it's you don't really liven up the party with.
I've actually been my because it also the boundaries around what is normal in our world versus the boundaries that are normal in the rest of society. I don't talk about details of individual stuff, but I talk to people about the experience and everything. And because I'm quite relaxed and fact based, and I'll be like blah blah blah, dead body this, dead body that. My partner has now got to the point where he fairly often, when we goes out for a meal or something, or he's like, "Mark, don't say rotting corpse, please." Like, oh, right. And he's like, "Yes, you do." And I'm like, "Whoops." Because yes, I think it becomes very normal for us in a way that I think I'm not sure whether it's unhealthy or it is healthy. It can't quite decide which of those is true, really. Yeah.
But that is your bread and butter, really, isn't it? Rotting corpses.
Yeah.
So, it's just like people
It's my
being at
bread
the
and butter,
office and complaining about Margaret on the other side of the office. It's,
they would definitely get a bit of that. Definitely have a bit of office gossip and all of those things. That's for certain. Yes. Some of my colleagues, we know what you're talking about, Spencer.
So my next question to you. So having worked with you in the woods as well. So if you get lost in the woods, where are we most likely to find you? So by this, I mean, so what is your kind of the thing that would draw you towards it the most? You know, what would be your brightest flame if you were a moth, if you know what I mean?
Never got lost in a wood.
No, I bet you haven't actually.
No, not seriously. I might have misguided my way for a couple of minutes, but I've got pretty good homing pigeon. The vegetation again gives me a story, which way to look, which way to go. Understanding us. But where would I be? I think in many cases, in most woodlands, where there's water, because where there's water, there's life. And most woodlands, if you've got a stream running through them, A, they help you get out of the wood, just follow the stream. And B, that's often where the most plant diversity is. So you'll find lots of really fun things around there. So, but yeah, it could be inside a hollow tree or climbing up to the very top. It's a bit creaky now. Now I'm nearly 60, but I can still climb quite well. So I'm not very good when it comes to health and safety at work.
Few people are
like,
really.
I'll just clamber. I've got to clamber. Well, it's very difficult to be totally health and safety minded when you're trying to recover the parts of a deceased person and you're in the middle of a huge bramble thicket and you've got to crawl on your hands and knees to find them. It's a bit of a tall ask sometimes for these kind of things, and clearly I'm not foolish and foolhardy. In fact, I am actually quite careful. I've never injured myself even moderately while work. Yep. So far, no broken bones, no serious cuts, no twisted ankles.
A
couple of them bruised egos and pride that probably sat on my bum a couple of times. And I did fall into a stream recently, which gave the crime scene manager was very, very amused, and she laughed for days. In fact, she still mentions it every time I see her. So yeah, I'm but I think you have to take these things with a little pinch of salt. Our primary task, often in my case, is to find and recover the deceased. And we sometimes need to do that in a timely manner. So we've got to get on with it.
Yeah. But it's interesting you talk about water, because I find water really interesting, because you could literally pour some out in your tap, put it in a pot outside, and then after a few days, it would look completely different, wouldn't it? You'd have, say, algae start to grow and things. And who knows what else could then start. I've seen a frog out in my garden and things like that it just attracts all this wildlife, and it's just amazing how it just will alter just in a matter of days.
Yeah, which actually, you mentioning water and change kind of picks on something I was thinking about earlier on, forgot to talk about, is, how we need to probably think more creatively in policing and forensics about what big data is and what's important. And I'm really, really interested in an area of science which is called eDNA, environmental DNA, because those city street walls, those car interiors, those car bonnets, surface of a wood, all of those are covered with bacteria, microbes and stuff like that. And they are a biodiverse fingerprint of where we've been. And, your jug of water in your back garden, might have looked like it had nothing in it. It certainly had stuff in it already, and then more stuff came in through the air, and that population changed. But that will be a unique, or pretty close to being a unique community. And so eDNA is a really powerful tool potentially for forensics in the future in this country and globally.
Yeah, definitely. And it could be, like as crucial as a fingerprint or something like that. If you've got someone saying, no, I've never visited this place, but you've got their eDNA all over to suggest that, well, actually you have, because you've got this unique sample from the scene, which you've now got on either your person, your vehicle, your property. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. It's fascinating.
Just needs a bit of innovation and support.
Yeah.
Hint, hint. HM's government.
So, are there any particular cases that you can share which, your work has had a big impact on?
So I always anonymize or seek to anonymize. I suspect, every now and then when I talk about some cases, people sometimes manage to secret squirrel, but I have always work out what I'm talking about. But I do try to, particularly on talking public, to respect the
Yeah.
deceased and families. But yeah, I had a very, very significant case a couple of years ago where the murderer, his conviction was pretty much sealed on the basis of a leaf that was recovered from underneath his car wheel arch. And I was able to identify it and demonstrate through using some of the mapping we were talking about earlier on through the botanical organisation, and using that in conjunction with mobile phone data and ANPR to show that realistically the only place that it could have come from was about 10 metres away from where the deceased body was found.
Right.
And that's over covering an area that was about half a county. So the suspect had driven back and forth between a number of towns, phone pinging off everywhere, ANPR going off everywhere. At the nearest the traditional evidence could place him, or potentially place him, was about 1.5 miles away in a nearby village. But even that was a little bit questionable for various reasons. And the leaf placed him 10 meters away from the deceased.
Which is far better than ANPR and like the
Which
radio
was
busting.
quite sad. That was when it works really,
Yeah.
really beautifully, when it comes together like it should in the textbooks and in the television series. But yeah, I've had, quite a few kind of very satisfying kind of thing. I mean, quite often the botany helps people understand what's happened. It's less frequently that it's that core thing, but it can be like that. I think the other one is a year or so back, I found the deceased very quickly for the police. We were actually just starting what we were expecting to be a large and complex search of quite a few hectares of woodlands, fields, lakes, farm buildings, ditches. And a colleague and I had spent several hours with the crime scene manager, the search lead, and the detectives, the SIO, walking around and basically triaging the landscape and going, we'll do this, we'll do that. This is how we approach this type of vegetation. And we pretty much packed up for the day. We went back to the vehicle, or they went back to the vehicle, with a plan for how we would come back and start the search properly the following week. I sat down to write some notes. I stood up and I looked across a large bed of stinging nettles in front of me, and I could see in the distance at the far end there just seemed to be something not quite right. It just didn't sit. And I looked and thought, that's a bit funny. So I kind of then noticed a hint of a fox trail, and I just walked through, and I could feel myself get all tingly. And I got a few meters away, and I could see a chink of bare earth through the leaves. I thought, peered forward, and the deceased was facing me like that. They were partially exposed in the shallow grave. And that was quite a psychological, because we're so used to, as people working in policing and forensics, that the body is found, we get taken there, and it's not a surprise. And even though it wasn't totally a surprise, but it was quite, I remember turning away and thinking, did I just hallucinate that kind of thing? Shook my head a bit and peered back in and went, no,
it's definitely there.
It's not potty. There is a dead person in front of me. Walked back to the road. My colleague was there, and she was at the back of the group, and she said as soon as she saw my face, she knew I'd found them. She could see the crazy in my eyes, I think. I basically told them, found them. The search lead kind of whooped and threw their arms around me, and it was fantastic. And we probably saved the force tens of thousands of pounds in search. Because one bonkers botanist is a lot cheaper than 10, 20 search people.
Over a series of weeks, even months. And
actually the place where I found them was not in the priority search area. It was a lower priority area.
Blimey,
so we would have And actually, funny enough, the dog had been passed. We'd had the dog around as well. They thought they'll bring a dog around as part of the kind of preliminary assessment. And the dog mildly indicated kind of, a number of quite a few meters away, but there was no significant indication. So they would have probably been there for another 2 or 3 weeks before we'd found them. Or maybe not that, but certainly a fair bit of time.
And depending on how recently that person had been discarded, I mean, that 2-3 weeks can be also crucial for the forensic evidence that you could obtain from that person.
Yeah. I think with them, they were, poor things, had been there for about 5 months. I'm trying to remember. They were quite heavily decayed.
Yeah.
The decomp was quite advanced. I mean, there was still a lot of soft tissue remaining. They weren't in good condition, poor thing. Again, it's so often, that we talk about it in the abstract. The finds, this, that's still a person. I actually saw my colleague from that job, and we were talking about this case, and she said, she was just mentioning how she was really pleased to find the woman's brooch that, is able to be, returned to the family.
Yeah.
Those little things are really important.
Yeah, definitely. Just giving the family some sort of answers, some sort of memories back, showing them that they haven't lost everything. There are some things that you can answer for them. That's why we do it, isn't it? But okay, so if someone wants to get you out to a scene, or wants to hire your services at all, how is it best that they do that, Mark?
Pounce on me in the street. I have my own website, which does need revising, Mark Spencer Botanist, or the Botany Consultancy. So I'm contactable through that. I'm also subcontracted through the 2 main forensic service providers who've been in operation in the UK for the last 15-20 years. So Cellmark, when they're part of Eurofins, and Electo, which are Forensic Access. And obviously we have a new organisation on the block in terms of forensic ecology and archaeology and anthropology, which is Apex.
Do you ever do any work overseas, Mark?
So I've been asked to provide insight and advice on overseas casework. I'm actually working on an overseas case at the moment. We're about to start fairly soon. Mainly exhibit examination is quite a historic case. I think it's about 30 years old. But I have given advice on cases in Southern Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. But mainly what I'd say is actually one of the things that's really important is as a botanist, I've got a pretty good understanding of plants and plant diversity around the world. But I don't have the detailed granular knowledge of how that landscape has developed through human activity, agriculture, and in the environment. And so I can look at a plant and go, oh, it's one of those. But it's not quite the same as really understanding how it lives, how it beats. So what I normally say to people is, under most circumstances, I'm very happy to provide advice, but I probably wouldn't personally practice. Particularly in places like the Middle East or Africa. I would rather, and I think it's appropriate, is work in partnership with a local botanist, and also essentially in that case mentor them. I'm actually would love to be able to develop some kind of mentoring program around forensic ecology across other parts of the world. Certain countries, for example, various parts of Central America and Brazil, for example, they're doing some really quite innovative stuff, integrating landscape, remote sensing, botany, looking for mass graves and things like that. So I kind of think it's probably better that my experience in Britain is more useful, probably in terms of training and capacity building, as opposed to direct casework. If that opportunity ever arose.
Because it's not just about understanding the plants, but as you say, it's understanding like the culture that led to the development of that plant.
Just time, season, even things like seasonality. You might be able to read, oh yeah, it's hot there, but it's really handy to know, for example, that actually last year was maybe really wet and the year before that was really hot and dry. And you can get that from being in that space. You know, actually, I'm working on a case at the moment where I've just finished the scene attendance. And part of my thinking is by knowing that actually last year in southern England, we were heavily impacted by drought. And actually the job you and I were working on, that was part of my thinking, was around having that familiarity about what had happened to that piece of landscape, not only from a botanical point of view, but an environmental point of view within that time frame. And you can't get that from living in another part of the world.
No, definitely not. But I think we'll leave it there, Mark. I could honestly talk to you all night. Maybe save some more questions for another day. But yeah, that's been really insightful. And I think, if listeners wondering how to become a forensic botanist, then all they need to do is pick up the phone. And that's what you did. And that's all the job interview takes, is to just pick up the phone.
I'm going to be swamped now. Help. I mean, actually, I will say quite seriously, one of the problems at the moment is there isn't a lot of capacity. So I would genuinely would love to have a continuity. At the moment, the industry and the sector is really on a knife edge in terms of capacity and funding. It's not brilliant. So it's quite a frustrating way ahead for people who might be interested in the world of forensic ecology and the kind of stuff I do. And I'm not trying to be totally about it, but I think it's important to be honest about the risks for people in terms of career.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mark. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, really good to catch up with you. Say hi to the phone.
Will do.
Cheers.
Thanks, Mark.
The night folds over the city like a trench coat collar turned up against the rain. And somewhere in the dark, the truth is still smoldering like the last cigarette in an ashtray. If you want to keep riding shotgun with us, subscribe to The Evidence Trail wherever you get your podcasts. And when the mic goes silent, find us at Evidence Trail on social media. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and remember, in forensics, the smallest detail can be the loudest witness. And if you're a crook walking the evidence trail, watch where you step.